This is the Regained Wellness Podcast with Jamie Logie, episode 112, The Life and Work of Richard Simmons. I'm serious, this is actually pretty interesting.
Hey, tell me who wants to dance? Now move. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and clap. You got it.
Hey guys, what's happening? Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Jamie Logie. I run regainedwellness.com. Thank you for joining me here today. And if this seems like a weird topic on a health show, stick with me because this is a pretty interesting, biography. And this, if you're obviously listening to this podcast right now, which means you've probably listened to other podcasts, or if this is your very first one, welcome. Thanks for joining me and making this the first podcast experience of your life. But so if you listen to any other podcasts or whatever, or I assume you listen on a phone through the podcast app on Apple, like an iPhone, or there's Stitcher Radio on Android, whatever, you can see the different podcast lists and categories and whatnot. And if you've paid attention to those, you've probably seen what is basically been the number one podcast in the world right now, which is called Missing Richard Simmons. And I'd been obsessed with this thing, and the final episode actually just came out today as I'm recording this, and what is this, Tuesday, March 21st, and this thing kind of caught a lot of people's attention because everyone, I assume you know who Richard Simmons is. If you don't, just YouTube the guy. But if you grew up like me in the 80s or 90s and 90s through kind of that whole period, there's no way you probably didn't know him. He was such a massive celebrity and just like this living cartoon. And no, I don't think anyone was really aware how much influence this guy had on people and the health and fitness industry. I had no idea. Now that I've looked more into this, like this podcast is extremely gripping because it tells his whole story of what he brought to people and the industry, and to just like kind of pop culture, to individual people's lives and helping them and saving their actual lives. And then the guy just disappears in around 2014. He's gone. Someone who's so empathetic and so, I don't know, needing of not publicity in a derogatory sense, but just lived off people's like emotions and helping them and wanting to make them better. And then the guy just completely disappears. And that's the focus of the podcast, Missing Richard Simmons. And it's pretty, concerning and intriguing, and just why this guy who was so involved in people's lives just kind of fell off the map and whatnot. So as kind of, you're watching the podcast or listening to the podcast and then learning a little more and looking back. And like I said, I had no idea how much influence and effect this guy created on people's lives, and how he really sort of changed the attitudes towards health and fitness and weight loss and food. And honestly, I think he's had now that I've learned all of this, I think he's had a bigger influence on people's well-being and their weight issues and their wellness and their health. And I can't think of anyone else like bigger than, anything that The Biggest Loser's done, or Jillian Michaels, or Michelle Obama. I didn't realize how deep this goes with this guy. So I'm going to, in this show, just talk a little more about that, his influence in health and wellness, but then also, which again, you probably wouldn't expect how this all tie together, lessons you can learn from his work and how devoted he was to people, and how, him kind of falling out of the limelight and pulling himself away, some lessons that actually you can apply to your life from that, which, yeah, bear with me. This won't be a super long one, but there's some interesting connections you can make with what's going on with him, and then how that actually might impact your whole life too. So let's get to this thing. Here we go.
Hey, tell me who wants to dance?
I want to dance, Richard. I want to dance. Okay, so here's the quick biography kind of background of where Richard Simmons came from and his whole journey. So Richard Simmons was born, actually his name is Milton Teagle Simmons, and he was born in New Orleans, Louisiana on July 12th, 1948. I'm just going to assume everyone listening knows exactly who I'm talking about, so we can kind of go into depth. Like I said, if you're not familiar, you're going to have to do a little more of your own research, but there's a lot of stuff out there on the guy. So he was the son of two show business parents, actually, which kind of explains a lot of his theatrics and whatnot. So born in 1948 and raised in the French Quarter of New Orleans, and he was in part of that area which was very performance based, and picture kind of like a Cirque du Soleil environment and real theatrics and performances and everything like that. So that probably influenced and shaped a lot of his showmanship and everything. He had an older brother. He was raised as a Methodist, and he would work in all these thrift stores when he was really young growing up, that were just like normal thrift stores, but in the French Quarter in New Orleans, everything was a little over the top. So he was actually, it sounds weird, but he was a master of ceremonies in these stores. So he was kind of like like a ringmaster, and just would entertain and basically as everyone was coming in and out, it just wasn't a drab store. Everything was completely over the top. Like he said, his mother was Russian Jewish combination, and she was one of those. Have you ever seen these before? Kind of like the vaudeville. They're called fan dancers. The women with those big like feather fan things, and they would just do a dance based around that. When he grew up, he went to a Catholic high school, and as a kid, he was very not well. He was very unhealthy. He had really bad asthma, so that prevented him from being super active. And then this is stuff I didn't know. I knew he always had he had his own weight loss journey he went on, but he was severely obese when he was young, like 13, 14, 15. By the time when he graduated high school, he weighed 270 pounds, and he's a small guy. He's only like 5'7", I think they said 5'8" at the most. So 270 on a 17-year-old is quite a lot of weight at that point. So you can only imagine how much further that would go if he hadn't decided to kind of get on top of his health and everything. So early on, he had actually considered being a priest, and then as he was getting out of high school, his reason he said he wanted to become a priest is because they wore bigger robes, and that was going to hide his weight, and it was the only thing he could think of that was not going to present how he looked in a on a day-to-day basis in front of people. I'm looking right here. He was actually 5'6.5" so 270 pounds on a 5'6.5" frame. He states one of the reasons that of his weight gain is because one of the other jobs he had when he was growing up was working as a kid selling pralines at some stores in his area. And he said on his walk to school, he would pass all the sweet shops, all the candy stores, and he couldn't help himself but would go in them all the time. So as he went on, he took the name Richard because he started college at University of Southwestern Louisiana. Then he went to Florida State University. He actually went to Florence in Italy for a while. He graduated with a BA in art. He lived in New York City. He worked in advertising and stuff like that. But he took the name Richard because I had an uncle named Richard who had paid for his college tuition. So it was a way he thought to honor him. So basically, as he was coming with his weight loss journey, as he's coming out of kind of high school and whatever, and considering what he's going to do, he wants to start losing weight. So the only approach at the time, there's what is this? This is in like the late early 60s and whatever, and there's not a lot of information as far as weight loss, and there's not a lot of models for fitness and things like that. And all he knew was to stop eating. So all he did was ate lettuce and took laxatives for basically 2.5 months, and he lost 123 pounds So it's 56 kilograms in 2.5 months. And when it's on a diet of just complete, essentially water, because he's eating lettuce and laxatives, you can imagine how harmful that is. I mean, it's good taking off that amount of weight, but over the long term, I mean, you should be looking naturally at, a couple years realistically. And so he was in the hospital and completely sick and ill, and started to, educate himself a little more on eating healthy. Like he realized, starving himself was, could potentially kill him. Still wanted to lose the weight, and then, devote himself more to healthy eating. So in the early 70s, so he moves to LA. He works at a hotel, which has a restaurant in Beverly Hills. And then he had his own weight loss, but as he started to learn more about, eating real food and becoming more healthy, he essentially kept that weight off his entire life. But the way he went about it was, life threatening. But then once he settled into this, more healthy, natural way, he was able to maintain that. So his whole movement into becoming this fitness icon and creating this empire kind of stemmed from that. Like, there wasn't a lot of, education out there or programs or whatnot. But in the 70s, this is starting to happen. Obviously in LA and California, diets started to become more popular. There's more of a health kick move. But a lot of these were fad diets that were, you've probably heard of the Hollywood grapefruit diet, which is still honestly kicking around. I don't know if I've seen it lately, but still within the last 5 or 10 years, you could buy them in stores. It was like this big bottle that had this kind of sunsetty, sun black label thing that said the Hollywood diet written in like neon. And it was like a grapefruit diet based, and that was thought, basically this goes all the way back to the 70s and is still almost considered effective today. But it goes back to actresses and actors wanting to drop weight really quick for certain roles or to get a role, and it kind of originated out of that, a completely unhealthy way to approach weight loss. And then in this, like I said, in the 70s, there's little to no information on things like that. People were honestly still not even sure what calories were. Like, there's more of an understanding as the decade went on. So the concept of how nutrition affected your body is, except for people who worked in that field, was not common knowledge. I'd say it's much more now. There's a lot more information out there that you can access, like listening to this show or anything online. At the touch of a finger, you can find as much information as you want. Back then, no. And then so he's seeing all these other fad diets and appetite suppressants. That was really big. The Atkins diet started around this time too, and then he saw that as a bit of a fad as well. And then the other issue, combine this food issue or lack of knowledge around nutrition. The other issue is, this is when fitness and gyms and aerobics and classes are really starting to boom. I'd say in the 80s is when they really took off, and honestly thanks to him. But in the 70s, more, gyms used to be more of an underground thing, sort of a niche, whatever, like, lifting weights was still considered sort of barbaric or whatnot, or unless you were a high level athlete. And even actually then, very few athletes train that hard with weights. There was always the thought that if you built muscles too big, that they would lead to less flexibility that would affect performance. And that was actually kind of common mindset, not everywhere, but from different sports standpoints. So he is looking around and he's seeing all these exercise studios starting to pop up, but they are all based around already fit customers. So all their programs, all their stuff was under the assumption, your fitness is already your life. Come here and you can do more fitness. He didn't see anything for those people who were in a really unhealthy state, which how he was when he was, a late teenager and weighing quite a bit. So, on a whim, I mean, opening a gym today is not really a gamble. You'll get members no matter what. Like, I'm thinking just where I live, in probably not even a 5-mile radius, there are, I'm just thinking right now, 1, 2, 5, 6, there's 7 gyms, like almost a stone's throw from my house. I don't live in the middle of a big city. I live more in a little bit of the outer ends, and these are normal big chain gyms, and that's not even including, there's some small personal training studios as well. That's just right in my little neighborhood. So it's not as big a gamble as it was back then. So he opens an exercise studio that was called the Anatomy Asylum, which is a kind of insane place. But his focus, and he's one of the first people to really do this, was placed, the emphasis was placed on healthy eating, learning about proper portions, and engaging in exercise that wasn't like drill sergeant boot camp stuff to beat the living crap out of you, but it was in an enjoyable endeavor in a supportive atmosphere. So those 3 things are kind of the foundation of his whole, not, I guess we call it brand now, but the cornerstone of his, I guess, fitness empire, that he took really what people needed when there was no solution at the time. So when he opened this place up called the Anatomy Asylum, eventually it gets his name changed to Slimmons with an L. He also had a salad bar attached to it called Ruffage, RUFF, another brilliant pun on, the dietary fiber roughage. He eventually moved away from that sort of restaurant aspect and was just focused primarily on the exercise. So it's now called Slimmons, and he's, starting to get momentum throughout Beverly Hills. And obviously there's a lot of rich and influential people there that kind of latch onto it. And that's probably at the time, that was probably the mecca of, word of mouth and a sort of growth of a business and a brand. So the big thing, though, that was different, that no one else had done before, was, like I said, instructors at the time. There was a lot of, aerobics classes, and those were big. It was, getting the air of leg warmers and spandex, and that's, I'm sure, on its way back. But it was, just come in, boom, workout's gone. The difference with him is because he genuinely cared about people. His aerobics classes were completely motivational based. And like I said, they catered to people who'd never exercised before, people with obesity problems, people with joint problems, elderly people, everyone. That was his focus, was on the real people, not someone who looks like they're on the cover of like Muscle and Fitness or whatnot. So this is kind of the cornerstone, like I said, of his own. Over this year, for 42 years now, I mean, he's almost 70, he kept off this 120 pounds the whole time. And, he's teaching other people the same things he'd been doing, which was a change because they weren't crazy, fad, extreme ideas. They were simple. It was about real food eating, exercise that you liked and that you wanted to do and that actually made you feel good, and being around other people that encouraged you. And, the leader of this whole gym and movement cares about them more than anybody. So here's some of the stats. Over the course of his whole fitness career, he'd help people, hard to pinpoint this, but in the ballpark of around 12 million pounds lost through, the people doing all his courses and the sweating to the oldies and all that sort of stuff. So like I said, the reach the guy's had has been incredible. So what happens is, like I said, when you're based in Hollywood, and now it doesn't really matter where you are because people's influence can stretch everywhere because we're more connected now. But back then, if you think Hollywood and Beverly Hills, that's, the epicenter of everything. And his influence grows more, and then he starts, wanting to reach more people because only so many people can fit in this class, that he was honestly still teaching up until his sort of disappearance from society in 2014. He was still teaching that class and getting paid $12 a class. As rich as the guy was, it was part of his whole life. So, but now he's got a good thing going and wanting to reach more people. And so that's when it got into the whole sweating to the oldies thing, which I think most people are familiar with. So now he was able, and again, this is like at a time where you had to order these things off TV. You couldn't order on Amazon. And so the reach that they had at the time was unbelievable. And as his video collection grew, he put out, I think it's 65 different workout, primarily VHS tapes. If you're under 25, you have no idea what the hell I'm talking about, but that's how we used to watch movies and whatnot, was on video cassette tapes. And that was primarily, and honestly, most of all the video, all his material he's put out was on VHS tapes. He has some DVDs, and a lot of things have been transferred, but like the core of all his stuff was all VHS based. So you had to order these things off. There's no website. You have to order them off TV, the whole deal. But as it's coming into the 80s and 90s, his videos were the most sold movies and basically tapes ever. I don't know if you just heard that, but Siri heard me say something and she tried to chime in, but I'll turn her off. So of any movie that was ever out or TV series or whatnot, his videos were the most selling of all time. And he was making, I think they were generating at the time around 200 million over the course of those few years, and he was taking a huge percentage of that. But a lot of the money he made, he would put back into all these programs, and it wasn't like he stockpiled it. He kept a certain amount for himself and used a lot to help other people. So now everyone's got these tapes, and everyone's starting to learn about this crazy guy with the super short shorts and the spangly kind of flag tank top he would wear and the weird afro hair. And now everyone's more familiar with him, and they start getting him onto talk shows. And he actually had his own TV show. It's actually kind of like a talk show thing of his own, which is actually an Emmy Award winning show, which I'd never heard of before. It's called The Richard Simmons Show, and that was his focus on health, fitness, exercise, healthy cooking. Yeah, and that had a huge reach. Again, I had no idea about this because like I said, when I grew up, Richard Simmons was this cartoon, this animated caricature of a person, and that's how most people know him. But when you see the work the guy did, that is kind of laid the groundwork for all, I'd say, our modern thing, like The Biggest Loser and all these like boot camp shows, and Dr. Phil and Oprah and all their platform for helping people. It honestly all goes back to him and his focus on caring about people and taking a healthy approach to their weight loss goals, their health goals, and all that sort of thing. So now, though, because his exposure is bigger, he's become this celebrity. And you've probably, I don't know if you remember all his David Letterman appearances, and they would just riff back and forth, and now he's this megastar, and he became more famous for being Richard Simmons as opposed to what his original thing was. But that was good too, because then he's able to reach more and more people. So the amazing part of all this, from learning and listening back, was how invested he was in people's success. Like, it's you see a lot of, I don't want to talk crap about, I don't know, any celebrity trainer or people you see on TV shows or whatnot. They're amazing on TV, but I think that's as deep as it goes. And I think that was what was associated with Richard Simmons, is, he performed for the cameras and then boom, it was gone. But as they're learning now, he would finish a class, before this is still what the videos are, or he's absolutely massive. He would finish a class. He would take time. He would take 10 minutes with every single person in the class, talk to them, help them. As the videos are growing, he's more appearances, whatever. And it's the same everywhere he went. He would take more and more time. And through his connections of his actually in-person teaching, or he would run these cruise ship weeks where people could come for like these weight loss weeks, or meet and greets or whatever. He would make all these connections. And no one knew this, but he would spend every day, he would call around 50 to 100 people a day who were on this, weight loss journey, to see how they were going, see how he could help, mostly just as much for encouragement and to be, an ear to listen to. And that's the stuff, no one really knew about. And this is, when these videos are making, and all his empire's making $200 million a year, he is, he can do whatever he wants with his time. His time is still completely devoted to these people. So this massive celebrity who's extremely wealthy is take, I doubt Oprah, as influential as she is calling 50 to 100 people a day to check in to see how they're, the state of their health or their mental health or what they need. And I don't talk to 50 people in a year, let alone in a day. Like calling people on the phone. Not that anyone even calls on a phone. I don't even text 50 people in probably 2 months. And this guy's on the phone every day. How much time would that take? Even if 100 people through the day to check in, it's not like you can just say, hey, how's it going? Bye. If someone's opening up to you, that's a long conversation. You're looking at 20, 30 minutes, even 10 minutes times 50 people a day. So the amount of attention he would give everyone was absolutely incredible, which is what's so weird about this whole thing now with this whole Missing Richard Simmons thing, that a guy who was so invested in people just completely dropped off the face of the earth around 2014. And then, listen to the show. It's called Missing Richard Simmons. And they found out, apparently there was different ideas that he was, kidnapped by his housekeeper, or he had gained a huge amount of weight and he was suffering, huge depression and whatnot, which is, if you think of the effort and energy it probably took to be him, to help all these people. Like I said, look at 12 million pounds from all these people all over the world, and everyone who felt like they knew him because he'd spend that much time and engage with them. How draining that would be on a person and how burnt out you must be. But what's weird is, for the type of human being he was, to be that involved and then to completely just cut it off 3 years ago. That's what the whole basis of the show is. And that's why, people were worried. Someone who was so invested and so, dependent. It was almost like his life breath was helping people, and to have that cut off, I think that's what concerned a lot of people. And according to the show, up to the most recent episode, or the last episode, they've actually had police go in and check because they said they didn't know if this was some extreme situation. And apparently he is fine and whatnot, and he's healthy, but it's just that question is how this commitment to people just can disappear. But at the same time, you can totally understand it, how draining that life must have been. But he was able to do it for 35 years. I wonder, it's just the question, why did that cut off at that point? I think the only engagement he had was calling into a like Good Morning America or something like that, where he was just kind of saying what was up a little bit, but not getting a lot of information. So this is what kind of leads me into like a takeaway point here too, is sorry, coughing to death here. I could edit that out, but I'll keep it as natural as possible. So I'm sure you're pretty busy. I think I'm kind of busy at times, but it's probably nothing compared to possibly what you're doing. And people have a lot going on, and you might have a lot of people depending on you at times. So I think the lesson here is to give yourself time to sort of step away. If you have a lot of responsibilities and people who depend on you, and that's awesome. And that's, a good, I'd say, like, it's a huge honor to be able to constantly help people, but it can drag you down because it can be so emotionally exhausting. And I think it's important to remember to take time for yourself, because it's not being selfish. It's just if you want to be helping others and giving other people your best, you need that, time, that sort of decompression time to focus on yourself for a little bit so you can give those other people your best. And that's something they should be recognizing and respectful of, because that's, in the case of, it's a different example, but I think sort of related. In the case of Richard Simmons, so much time, and it looks like he's completely spent and cut off. So if you don't build in those moments where you can do your own thing for a little bit, it's going to be harder for you to give your best to other people. So first, those people around you should understand that, however you can explain that and, relay that to them. And then also don't, think it's a selfish thing. It's actually better in the long run for you and for those people who are important to you and that rely on you. So whether that's, I'd say one of the best things there is exercise itself, not only for how good it's going to make you feel, but it's kind of that time away, on your own, whether it's even just a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour or whatnot. It's that, for me, it's kind of my own, as tough as my workouts are, and I like to beat the crap out of myself, it's still relaxing in a weird way, if that makes sense. If you probably understand if you're kind of in the same boat, but it's like, I don't see, it's, kind of like a combination of meditation and relaxation, as tough and engaging as it is, but it's like a hobby. It's almost like golf in a good way. It's a way for you to unwind. Again, that's probably a weird way to say it. But that's why exercise is a good outlet. So in your case, make time for that, or whether it's, just going for walks or hikes or time alone. Like I said, allow yourself that decompression time, because if it's not in there, eventually you can run for a while off it, but eventually you're just going to burn out. So I'd say that's the takeaway from this whole thing. It seems weird to have a show devoted to Richard Simmons, but you can see that there's some takeaways from his situation. And I think it's just interesting to look back on stuff I was completely unaware of with this guy, and how much good and work he did. And we're starting to learn a little more about it through this podcast and just looking back on the guy's career. So it's pretty amazing. Like I said, I don't know if there's anyone. I'd say like Oprah Winfrey is. Do you have to even say Winfrey? I think if I say Oprah, everyone knows who I'm talking about. I'd say she's kind of that same equivalent with the amount of reach and influence she's had, but encourages in people's lives, and they look to her. And that was the same way with him, but it was completely health focused, and looking at proper diet and exercise. But at the same time, he was a guy who was able to be someone people could depend on, even though he's this massive rich celebrity, which is I don't know if there's anyone else who was able to do that sort of thing. So yeah, I don't know. Hopefully you found this interesting. I did kind of a different style show. But don't worry, I'll be back with specific nutrition topics and fitness things and a whole bunch of other things coming up. So yeah, if you liked it, feel free to give me a shout. You can write, or other things you want to maybe see covered or whatnot. So you can write to me at info@regainedwellness.com. If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes. It's probably the best place. Like I said, if you're listening to a podcast already, you're probably familiar with podcasts, and hopefully you have subscribed. But you might be listening to somewhere else, or it might be on my website or whatnot, but go and subscribe in whatever you listen to podcasts. So you get the shows automatically sent to you. And I want to give a shout out to Roger, who's a big listener. So thanks for listening, Roger. We appreciate it. And I will be back soon. Have a good week. Talk to you later.